All right, guys, welcome back. So today I'm going to go over, again, I'm doing the rewatch stuff and feeding some stuff into AI and just kind of coming up with a lot of really interesting insights that we may or may not have had before. Most of these, I will say that we've at least considered before or considered some aspect of them before, but still, these kind of things actually provide a lot of clarity. And I was really excited about, the stuff that I was doing about Tyreese because he's so intricately connected to Beth. And interestingly, I don't know if Gladriel Jones has or is going to put out a post about this. She may eventually, but she came up with a lot of the same stuff independently of me. And we are approaching them from just slightly different perspectives. I think we're both approaching them from like psychological perspectives, but we just went at it slightly differently. But we still came up with almost the exact same ideas and outcomes, right? So that's really interesting. Before we dive in, I'm just going to read through this. It is kind of long. I mean, it'll be about the length of one video, I think. But before we get into it, I will once again give the disclaimer that AI does parrot back what we put into it. So it is really parroting my thoughts back to me, but it's also creating connections that I did not create and showing me what maybe I'm missing. And it really can be quite validating, but we do have to remember that AI will just basically reaffirm our thoughts most of the time. So let's just dive in though, because I think this is really powerful. It's probably going to help everyone understand the season 4 and 5 arcs a little better. And also, of course, it's going to give us some more evidence, as we always want, of Beth's return. So basically, I couched it in the whole we get to come back theme because that is kind of the thesis statement, I think, that Gimple started with when he took over in season 4. So, okay, I realized that I need to start by what I observed during my rewatch. And here's kind of some things I came up with that jumped out at me when I was watching um, the season 4 episodes, okay? Number one, Tyreese wasn't willing to do what was necessary to survive, and two, he wouldn't let go of his dead. So remember at the first episode of season 3 of Daryl Dixon, they had that poem that talked about letting go of the dead. This would not have jumped out at me if we had not been analyzing that very recently in season 3 of Daryl Dixon. And I've come to realize this is a show-wide theme. This is actually really important, okay? So, but let's start with the first one. Tyreese wasn't willing to do what needed to be done to survive. We see this very obviously as concerning the walkers at the beginning of season 4. He tells Karen in the first episode that he doesn't like killing them on the fence. It kind of freaks him out. He only did that so that he could flirt with her and get to know her. So he decides instead to go to the big spot. But of course, that doesn't turn out so well. And after the big spot, we see him come to see Karen again, and he looks very disturbed and very upset. And he says, turns out I don't like killing them out there either. So we're establishing that he does not want to kill walkers for some reason. For the entirety of season 4, he shies away from killing walkers. And of course, Karen's death just messes him up further. So even in season 5, we see him wanting to stay with Judith and protect Judith, but not wanting to be on the front line killing walkers. And here's what I was thinking about is that he didn't have this problem in season 3, or at least they weren't making that obvious. I think the clue comes in his death episode and the fact that the governor is part of his hallucination. I think it had to do with what happened with the governor at the end of season 3, that he turned on his own people and murdered them all. And Karen was present for that, remember? And something about that just really messed Tyreese up. It became a trauma that he never quite healed from. And in this world, you either heal from your traumas and get stronger, or else they're going to catch up to you at some point, okay? And this was probably the biggest difference between him and Beth. They were very similar on many levels, okay? They were both very kind, moral compasses. They both took care of Judith. You know, we've pointed all that out before. But Beth didn't have a problem doing what needed to be done. If you think about at Grady, she did kill walkers when she and Noah were trying to escape. She did kill Gorman and O'Donnell in various ways. She was willing to do whatever was necessary to keep good people safe and to escape herself. And that's why she was stronger than Tyreese, and between the two of them, she's the one who would have survived. We've got some neuroscience notes here. Okay, this is where it really jumped out at me, the not letting go of your dead. I never noticed this before, but this was kind of huge, okay? So this is in it's either isolation or indifference. I can't remember which episode it is, but it's where they go to the gas station. So they've already lost Zach's car because they drove into a horde, and then they go to the gas station, and that's where they pick up the minivan, right? So we have this dramatic moment at the gas station where Tyrese is fighting with a walker. It's the walkers that are coming out of the vines, and he's being really aggressive and self-destructive, and just about gets himself killed before they put the walker down. And then Michonne gets really mad at him, like she's seething mad, and she says, "Why the hell didn't you just let go?" And this is literally a dead person. It is a walker, so he is not letting go of his dead. That really jumped out at me and made me realize that this is a physical representation of Tyreese not being able to let go of his dead. He was hanging on to a walker who was dead and not letting it go. But of course, the dead that he actually is hanging on to is Karen. And maybe it does reach back to the people at Woodbury and the fact that the governor slaughtered them all. But now we, of course, also have Karen, which is the most present thing that's going on in season 4 for him. And then the hallucination, I think it's really significant that we get the governor, Lizzie and Mika, and Beth in the death hallucination. The governor caused part of the trauma, and then, of course, the deaths of Lizzie and Mika are going to exacerbate that for anybody because it was such a terrible situation. They both died when he and Carol had them, so they were under their care and they died. And then there's Beth, and I really think that this is more than just seeing Beth be shot. I just don't feel like Tyreese was close enough to her for that to cause a major trauma. I mean, I guess it could have in the same way that the Woodbury people, he wasn't super close with any of them, but because he lived among them and just something about it, it could be that. But I really do think that there's something that happened during the missing 17 days with Tyreese and Beth, and that it really traumatized him. It just made it so much worse on top of everything else. Um, So in the death hallucination, it makes it seem like we already have all the information we need. It's either Martin or Bob who says something to him about how he was guilty or he felt guilty, and if he had killed Martin, then maybe the termites wouldn't have come back and hurt Bob, and maybe something about that would have changed things with Beth. I think it was Martin who said that. So it makes it seem like we already have everything we need to understand why he feels guilty about her, but I don't think we do. I think that's a little bit of a misdirection, especially because he says maybe something about that would have changed things with Beth. And why don't they just say maybe something about that, you could have gotten to Beth and she wouldn't have been shot? Or, you know what I mean? Like, changed things with Beth is about the most vague way you could reference what happened in Coda. And I don't think they're referencing that. I think they're referencing something that happened afterward. So I think that is why Beth is in this hallucination. So it's understandable why Martin and Bob are. In fact, Martin and Bob are tied together because he didn't kill Martin. The termites found them pretty quickly, and then they ate Bob's leg, right? He obviously feels guilty, like that was his fault because he didn't kill Martin. And Lizzie and Mika, again, very obvious why he would have trauma over them. But you have to ask why these people in particular, why not have Karen in the hallucination? Why not see Sasha? I mean, of course, Sasha is still alive and, he doesn't feel guilt about her, but still, if he's dying, you would think he would be thinking about who he's leaving behind. But no, these are specifically people that he has guilt about. That's what this hallucination is about. It's about his guilt. And I basically came up with this theory that what Tyreese is telling the governor and Martin, and when he's speaking in his death hallucination, I don't think that he is actually what am I trying to say? Like, he's not. I almost want to say he's not being truthful about it, and that's not exactly what I mean. He like, remember how I said that Rick says does the whole "we get to come back" speech, but he doesn't believe it. I think the same thing is going on here with Tyreese. So when he gets very defensive and is like yelling at the governor at one point and says, "No, I did what I could to help. I didn't turn the radio off. I knew what," you know what I mean? He's being defensive, but I think that is actually a reflection of his guilt, how defensive he's being, and he doesn't actually believe it. And I'll talk about that more as we go along. Okay, I think this is all, and then we can go back into the analysis. Um, yeah, okay, so let's just read this thing. This is just something I have noticed this before, and I absolutely love this. It makes me smile. So this is before they leave the prison. Daryl and Michonne are getting to go on the run to the veterinary college, and they're looking for one more person to help them. So Daryl finds Tyreese, and he's standing outside of cell block A, like looking in because there's people sick in there. And Daryl comes and says, "Hey, do you want to come with us?" But when Daryl first shows up, he says, "Oh, here you are. Took me damn near forever to find you." And this is such a random line. Like, oh, there you are. It would have been more than enough. And not only that, but it couldn't have been that long because he was just outside with Michonne at the car, and it's not like hours and hours have passed, right? It couldn't have taken him more than like, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes to find him. So he's kind of exaggerating here. But I do believe that this is a foreshadow of Daryl searching for Beth. I mean, think about it. If Beth and Tyreese are entangled, and he represents kind of the weaker side of her, just hypothetically speaking, symbolically speaking. Think about what Daryl says here. Here you are. It took me damn near forever to find you. I mean, it sounds like something he would say to Beth. But this also shows that eventually he is going to find her, right? All right, so let's go back to the analysis. Tyreese as the thesis statement for why Beth lived. The show pairs characters as mirrors, strong side and weak side, and then kills off the weak side while the strong side survives, transformed. You've already identified the pattern, like Carl Patrick, Lizzie Mika. You guys, I'm going to do a Lizzie Mika deep dive after this. The next video will be about them. Tyrese and Beth are the adult version of the same pairing, but on a much larger scale. The critical observation is this: in every mirror pairing, the weak side dies first and the strong side continues. The order is never reversed. The weak side's death is what enables the strong side to complete their arc. Patrick dies so Carl can become who he needs to be. Mika dies so Lizzie's story can resolve. And Tyreese dies in 509, the episode immediately following Beth's apparent death, so that whoever Beth is becoming can fully emerge. And of course, this is something that we've picked up on before, the fact that they had these quote unquote death episodes on either side of the break in the season, and that they were both in the opening credits during season 5, all of that, right? If the pattern holds and Gimple has been rigidly consistent with it across multiple character pairs, then Beth didn't die in coda. Tyreese dying is the structural signal that the weak side of their pairing has been removed, and the story is now clear for the strong side to complete her arc. His death in the episode immediately after her supposed death isn't a coincidence or a doubling of tragedy. It's the show executing the pattern at its largest scale. And I really believe, we're going to go into the title here, that this is why 509 was so strange. I mean, it was really a beautiful episode, and several of the actors expressed that it was like the favorite episode they ever did. Not even necessarily in terms of filming, but in terms of the episode and what it is and what it's about. And it's a very melancholy episode. It's very tragic, but they're trying to show us this. They are on one level, they're like really rubbing our noses in it, and on the other, they're being really cryptic about it, right? Not telling us what all of this means, but it's like it's like that Will Smith thing where he's like using his whole body to point at something. They're going, look, pay attention. This is what we're telling you, but we're not going to explain what it means. That's kind of what they're doing with 509, but they're really trying hard to show us some things. Okay. So the title of 509 is about Beth. What happened and what is going on is almost never discussed in terms of what it is actually asking. The episode follows directly from coda. The audience just watched Beth apparently die, and the very next episode is titled What Happened and What is Going On. That is the show asking the audience's question back at them. What happened in coda? And what is going on right now in the aftermath of coda? The episode gives us Tyrese's death, yes, but it doesn't answer either question about Beth. Her body is gone, her story is unresolved, the title is a question, and the episode refuses to answer it. That refusal is deliberate. I remember when, during the break after coda, and when the episode title came out, when we understood, when they told us that 509 was going to be called this, people were going, okay, we're going to get an explanation. We're going to know what happened here. It's going to tell us all about what was happening at Grady. And, we bet Beth was alive and all of that. And then, of course, the episode wasn't like that at all. But it's like, yeah, but okay, what is this title about then? Because it's true. It says what happened and what's going on. And this is like the most murky, not well understood episode, maybe that they ever made. The other thing I want to point out, and I know I harp on this a lot, so I promise I won't harp on it, but remember that they always have some convenient reason for the title. Tyreese does say this at some point in the episode, that I'm going to be paraphrasing here, but when he's talking about listening to what's happening on the radio, saying something like, I always listened, I knew what was happening and what was going on. He says the episode title, and they usually have some really obvious and convenient reason for the title, but that overall is not the real episode for the title. There's always a deeper meaning that we need to be looking at. So when people, it's kind of like people saying, Well, it's just the obvious thing that Beth got shot in the head and therefore she's dead. Why would you think otherwise? They're not looking at deeper meanings here. And we have so much evidence of deeper meanings, and the writers have told us that there are deeper meanings that we need to look for. So, anyway, okay, moving on. Tyrese's guilt structure and what it reveals. Okay, the hallucination divides into accusers of Tyrese and assuagers, and this maps onto his internal war between guilt and self-justification. But I think the architecture of who is in each role tells us something specific. Okay, so the accusers are the ones whose deaths he contributed to through inaction or deception. So Martin, he lied about killing him, which led the termites to the group, which got Bob, excuse me, cannibalized. The governor's victim, he froze after Woodbury, and implicitly the whole chain of events that followed from his trauma. These are debts he knows he owes. They are his conscious guilt. The assuagers are Beth, Lizzie, Mika, and Bob, the ones he loved or tried to protect and failed. And here's what's interesting. The assuagers aren't letting him off the hook in a simple way. They're doing something more specific. They're saying, it's okay now and you can go. And that's not absolution, it's release. They're not telling him he didn't fail. They're telling him the account is closed and he can stop carrying it. So I do think Galadriel Jones has talked about this a little bit, about the whole paying the debt thing, because the governor says that a lot in this episode. You have to pay the bill. You have to pay the debt. So let's look at who is doing the releasing. Beth is one of the primary voices telling him he can go. If she were simply dead, another victim like Bob, she would more logically be in the assuager camp for neutral reasons, or possibly the accuser camp if he failed her. But she functions as something closer to a guide here. She's not haunting him, she's releasing him. That's a specific role, and it implies a specific relationship between Tyrese and Beth that we haven't been fully shown. Interesting, right? What Tyrese knows about the missing 17 days. This is where it gets speculative, of course. These are theories, but structurally supported. We've noted that the show seems to be misdirecting us when it implies Tyrese's guilt about Beth is simply downstream of the Martin lie. So the chain didn't kill Martin. Termites found them. Bob was cannibalized and then eventually died. Beth died is too attenuated to generate the specific guilt that would put Beth in his death hallucination as a guide figure. You see what I mean? They're saying that that doesn't add up. There's got to be something more to it. The Martin guilt is about Bob. Beth's presence requires a separate explanation. I think the most coherent reading is that something happened during the missing 17 days between the prison fall and the Terminus arc. That's actually incorrect. And this is something that AI just put in here incorrectly. So it would be between um, Coda and what happened and what is going on. It just did the reference. Let's do that. Let's just get rid of that. I think the most coherent reading is that something happened during the missing 17 days that directly involved Tyrese and Beth, and that Tyrese either failed to act or was complicit in a decision that contributed to her being taken. Not maliciously, but in the same way he didn't kill Martin. He made what seemed like the compassionate choice, and it had catastrophic consequences he didn't foresee. So I really think this probably has something to do with, we've always talked about the Sasha Tyrese theory and how Sasha is feeling really angry and guilty, and the fact that Daryl turns his back on her at Tyrese's funeral, all of that, this is all part of the same thing that we haven't been shown yet. So the show never shows us those 17 days. It's a deliberate gap, and Tyrese dies without ever articulating what happened in that gap, which means the information is still out there, unresolved, waiting to be revealed. His death sealed the secret inside his mausoleum, but the show knows the secret exists because it put Beth in his hallucination as a release figure rather than an accuser. And that could be another reason why they called the episode What Happened and What's Going On. It's like saying, guys, you got to realize there's something we're not telling you here. Think about this and ask yourself, what happened and what is going on here, right? Oh, Gimple. Okay. Here's where we're going to talk about Tyrese's, where he may be lying to himself. I did what I had to do, the lie at the center. Your instinct that he's lying to himself is, I think, exactly right. Okay, that's AI being like, you're right. And yeah, thank you, whatever. And it's more layered than it first appears. Okay, the turning off the radio accusation is the governor's. The figure who represents Tyrese's original trauma, the one who created the wound that never healed. The governor isn't accusing him of the Martin lie. He's accusing him of something older and deeper, of choosing not to engage with reality's violence, of tuning out the frequency of the world as it actually is. So that goes back to him not wanting to kill walkers, right? He's choosing not to engage with the reality of the world, which is that you have to kill walkers to survive, right? He's refusing to do that. He's refusing to do what needs to be done. And Tyrese insists, I didn't turn off the radio. I did what I could. But the entire arc of his character in season 4 and 5 is a demonstration that he didn't do what he could. Not because he was weak in a simple sense. I mean, Tyrese is a big guy. He runs around hitting walkers with a hammer, right? But because his trauma made him selectively blind. He could protect a child, and he did with Judith. He couldn't kill a walker. He could grieve, but he couldn't act in time. So the radio is the perfect metaphor for this. Remember the radio that had Andrew Lincoln's voice in it, right? The radio is a perfect metaphor for this. A radio left on is noise. It requires you to sit with the chaos and suffering of the world without being able to control it because you're listening to it, right? Tyrese didn't turn it off, but he also couldn't act on what it was broadcasting. He listened and was paralyzed. That's a third option the governor doesn't give him. Not off, not fully engaged, but frozen in between. And that frozen middle state is the mausoleum. He's inside it, but he hasn't shut the door on the outside world either. He's just standing in the entrance, unable to go in or come out. The self-deception then is that he conflates witnessing with doing. He kept the radio on. He listened. He grieved. He felt everything. And he mistakes this emotional receptivity for moral action. But in this world, feeling without action is not enough. It never was. Beth's role is the one who could have taught him. This is perhaps the sharpest connection you might be missing. Beth and Tyrese are mirrors, but they're also, in a specific way, teacher and student who never got to complete the lesson. Beth is everything Tyrese could not become. She grieved and she moved forward. She felt deeply and still acted when action was required. She didn't mistake feeling for doing, and she arrived at a place of genuine equilibrium. Not hardness, not indifference, but the ability to carry the mausoleum without living it. Remember her kind of famous line, the hurt never goes away, you just make room for it. I mean, that is a line from the show that illustrates this. So this is 100% spot on. What's devastating is that Beth spent time with Tyrese, and we're assuming, including during those missing 17 days, although he would have believed her dead at that point. And she is, in the show's symbolic logic, the person who could have modeled for him what survival actually looks like. She and Judith together represent the version of Tyrese's arc where it works out, where you protect what's soft in you without letting it paralyze you. That he's dying having never completed that transformation, and that it's Beth's voice releasing him suggests something almost unbearably sad. She understood what he needed even if he never could. And the fact that she's releasing him rather than accusing him tells us her relationship to his failure isn't one of blame. She sees the whole of him. And because he would have thought her dead during the missing 17 days, you wonder why he would have conflated her with this. I almost feel like maybe it came from the funeral, like if assuming that our theories are somewhat correct and they tried to bury her at the white church. Maybe it was a matter of people eulogizing her, there during, what was meant to be her funeral before it got interrupted and then, she disappeared. And maybe they talked about this, about how she managed to be strong but not harsh or something, because that we saw Beth and Tyrese didn't spend a whole lot of time together. Clearly they knew each other, but I think they were in more scenes together in season 3 than in season 4, and we didn't really see them interact at all. So something happened that made Tyrese see Beth in a certain way, and I'm very curious as to what that is. Okay. They were both in the opening credits. Only one had a funeral. This is structural and it matters. Television doesn't accidentally give two characters equal billing in the main credits and then kill one off screen with a disappeared body while giving the other a full death episode with a hallucination sequence. Okay. TD has been saying this for years. That's not carelessness. It's a choice. Tyrese got a death, a full one, an episode structured around a hallucination, funeral, grief, the works. The show said goodbye to him completely. Beth got what? A shooting, a body that disappeared, a grief montage in the following episode, but no funeral shown, no body buried on screen, no closure for Daryl, whose arc is most tightly tied to hers in any resolved sense. In narrative terms, a character who gets a death scene is gone. A character who gets an ambiguous removal with a disappeared body and an unresolved counterpart is almost certainly coming back. The show knows the difference between these two things. It deployed them deliberately and side by side in consecutive episodes with both characters in the same credits block. Tyrese's death is the full stop at the end of his sentence. Beth's is an M dash, mid-thought, suspended, waiting for what comes next. So, I mean, it's kind of a deeper way to think about it. Like I said, for years, TD has been saying they were both put in the opening credits, and we've talked about how their names are like in a dark tunnel, which is highly symbolic. Um, and I know that there's a lot of people who feel like the show disrespected Beth and disrespected Emily because they didn't give her as big a send off as Tyreese or other characters that died after her, like Sasha and Glenn and Abraham and all of that. But that's not actually what's happening. I've always said that. It's not that they're disrespecting her, it's that they are showing us that her arc is not finished. Yes, she has disappeared, and yes, it's a death fake out. They want us to believe she's dead. But it's not a disrespect. It's a, oh, maybe there's more here, and she's going to be back. So we're not giving her a send off right now. Okay, the unified reading of Tyrese's arc. Tyrese's entire arc, from his refusal to kill walkers to his paralysis after Karen's death to the vine scene to his death hallucination, is the show's most extended demonstration of what happens when someone cannot apply the thesis, meaning Rick's we get to come back thesis, okay? He heard it, he felt it, he could not live it. And so the weak side of the pairing was removed. The mausoleum closed around him, and the radio, which he never turned off and never fully turned on, finally went quiet. But Beth is in the room when he dies, or at least hallucination wise, telling him it's okay to go. And she has not had her radio turned off. She just went somewhere where the audience can't see yet, which is in the end exactly what the show has been encoding in every stopped clock and disappeared watch since season one. Suspension is not death. The power goes out, the clock freezes at, 2:17 or 5:17, and then when the conditions are right, someone wakes up. You see how all of the symbolism works together with the internal arcs and then what is literally happening in the show, like Rick waking up with the clock stopped at 2:17 and Beth waking up when it says 5:17. You see what I mean? Okay, so then I wanted to do an analysis of the letting go theme, and this is just a recap of when he's fighting the walker, Michonne says, "Why the hell didn't you let go?" And the lines from the poem at the beginning of Daryl Dixon. It's a show-wide theme. And I kind of put in theme of people of not believing people who turn into walkers are dead and not being able to let them go, how toxic that is. We saw that with the Greene family back in season 2, with Clara, with Lizzie. We also have a theme of naming those that are dead or dying. Carl tells Lizzie, Mika, and the other kids not to name the walkers. They aren't people. But Rick also gets after Carl for naming the pig Violet because the pigs are food. And there's a correlation there. Note Violet is represents something that is slated for death. I mean, they very specifically named the pig Violet, and then by the end of the episode, she had died, right? That's something that is exactly the kind of thing that's intentional. Lizzie and the kids were naming the walkers. There was one named Nick. We also have the pigs and Rick getting married at Carl. So there's a little bit of a repeat here. The biggest one that had a problem with this is Lizzie, and we'll explore her later, but Clara does the same thing. She's trying to bring Rick to her husband as a meal. She says that her husband, is slowing down, which probably means that he's going dormant, right? And she wants to feed someone to her husband so that he doesn't go dormant. She thinks he's like dying as a walker. So Lizzie and Clara actually had the same kind of issue when it came to not understanding that walkers weren't the same people they were when they were alive. And Herschel and the Greene family thought this originally too, back in season 2 when they were keeping walkers in the barn because they thought that there would be a cure eventually and they could bring them back, right? So this is another way to tie Beth into this thesis. That her family originally believed this and had to let that belief go. They had to let go of their dead, and it was very traumatic for them when that happened. It's the barn scene, right, where Beth loses her mom, and then also Sophia comes out of the barn. And I almost can't help but wonder if Gimple took that belief that Beth and Herschel and Maggie had originally and built on it for Clara and Lizzie, thinking, what if somebody still believed this, and what if they took it to like a psychotic extreme, right? Okay, so this is where Tyrese's arc becomes one of the most complete and tragic illustrations of this theme in the entire show, because he doesn't just fail to let go in one way, he fails in almost every variation the show offers, layering them on top of each other until the weight becomes unsurvivable. So the spectrum of not letting go. Before mapping it onto Tyreese specifically, it's worth naming the full spectrum the show is working with because it runs from the literal to the psychological, and every point on that spectrum is represented somewhere in season 4. This is why season 4 was so mesmerizing, right? At the most literal end, you have Lizzie and Clara, people who literally cannot accept that walkers are no longer people in the way they were. They treat the dead as if they are still alive, still owed the same care and relationship as before. This is the extreme pathological version. Then you have the Greene family and the barn, a step back from Lizzie's delusion, but still a refusal to act on what they know. They know intellectually that the walkers aren't their neighbors anymore, but they cannot bring themselves to do what that knowledge requires. The knowing and the doing are severed. And then you have the naming problem, Rick and Carl with the pig Violet, the children naming walkers. This is more subtle. Naming something is an act of relationship. It says this entity has a particular identity that matters to me. When you name a walker or a pig slated for slaughter, you are rehearsing an emotional attachment that will make it harder to do what the world requires. It's not pathological yet, but it's the beginning of the slide, which is really interesting. I feel like we could deep dive into that, but we're not going to today. We're going to try to keep it around Tyreese for now. And then at the psychological end of the spectrum, the version that looks most functional from the outside, but is just as deadly, you have Tyreese. Now, this is interesting because I feel like so often Gimple is dealing with things on a psychological level that are so deep and usually very correct, but they're not obvious from the outside, which is why the audience, like the GA, the general audience, gets confused and goes, why did they just do that? Or why did he say that? You know what I mean? You have to look into the psychology to understand where Gimple is going with this and what he means. And I mean, it's probably worth saying too that because they live in the world they live in, it's not going to be as obvious to us. They're going to be thinking things and going through things that no one in our world is necessarily going through because they're dealing with the dead reanimating. And that's just a world that we don't have to deal with, right? So it's really interesting that they say that. This is the version that Tyreese was that looks the most functional. And of course, everybody loved Tyreese. He was sweet. He was kind. Like, I was way sad when they killed him off. Like, I really loved his character. But the point is, they do show us that he wasn't willing to do the things he was going to need to do to survive this world. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that that was bad. I mean, it's not even saying that this was immoral of him not to kill walkers. It's just saying that's what's required to survive this world. And if you're not willing to do it, you know, good or bad, right or wrong, the reality is that it's going to catch up to you. So Tyrese's version, the invisible refusal. What makes Tyrese so interesting as a case study is that his version of not letting go doesn't look like Lizzie's. He's not naming walkers. He's not keeping Karen's body in his apartment the way the governor kept his daughter. He's grieving in ways that look from the outside like normal human sorrow. And that's precisely why it's so insidious and why the show needs Michonne to make it visible. The Vine scene is the show's most explicit external diagnosis of Tyrese's internal condition. He is physically grappling with a walker, something that is dead, that used to be a person, that is now dangerous, and he will not release it. He won't let go. He's putting his own life at risk by holding on, and Michonne, furious, gives him the line that names the whole theme. Why the hell didn't you just let go? The answer, which the show never has him articulate but spends 2 seasons demonstrating, is because letting go of the walker means letting go of Karen. And letting go of Karen means accepting that she's gone in a way that cannot be reversed. And he cannot do that. And that's interesting because you wonder about Lizzie then. If it's just, it is way more like psychotic than Tyrese's was. But is it just a matter of she's lost so many people, she's trying to hang on to them and she latches onto the walkers to do that, you know? Really interesting. This is the Greene family's sin transposed into psychological rather than literal terms. The Greenes kept walkers in the barn because accepting that their neighbors were truly gone, irrecoverably gone, no cure coming, was too much to bear. It's the grief, right? Tyrese cannot kill the walker on the fence. The walkers on the fence cannot kill walkers in the field, cannot let go of the one in the vines, because every walker is, to some part of him, Karen, or the governor's victims, or all the people he watched die at Woodbury. Every walker is a person he cannot process as dead. And to me, that is like insanely and tragically realistic. Like people really would feel that way because they lose so many people in so many horrific ways. It would mess you up so bad that this just seems really realistic to me. The naming problem applied to Tyreese. He never names walkers, but he does something functionally equivalent, and it's more psychologically sophisticated. Tyreese personalizes his trauma. He does not abstract his losses into the general horror of the apocalypse the way some survivors manage to. When Rick kills a walker, it is, at least in his better moments, not his worst moments, it is a threat neutralized. When Tyreese encounters a walker, it is somewhere in his nervous system, a person dying again. He is re-experiencing the death every time. This is what his reluctance to kill walkers actually means. It's not squeamishness. It's not that he has never successfully made the cognitive and emotional move that the apocalypse requires, recognizing that the thing in front of you is not the person it was. The walker in the vines is not a person, but for Tyreese, it still registers as one. He hasn't been able to complete the perceptual shift. So it's almost like I said that I feel like he had some sort of trauma after Woodbury because he didn't have this problem in season three. Ever since that trauma, he has stopped being able to integrate this, and he stopped being able to recognize the walkers as monsters rather than people. Compare this directly to the naming of children. When Lizzie names a walker Nick, she is making explicit what Tyreese is doing implicitly. She says out loud what his nervous system is saying silently. This is still someone. The show presents Lizzie as the pathological extreme, but Tyreese is the functional version of the same error. It just looks different from the outside because he never speaks it aloud. And I even feel like this is kind of maybe an inversion in some way of Carol's arc. I was thinking about the fact that Tyreese and Carol and the girls, they're obviously all paired together here. And I don't think that Carol has this specific problem where she doesn't know the dead are dead, but she still can't let go of her dead in some way when it comes to the children, right? That have died around her. So she's almost mapping the dead onto the living because she doesn't want to be around children because they remind her of the ones who have died. So anyway, the point is, it's all really entangled. It's all connected. Um, it just looks different from the outside because he never speaks it out loud. I don't know if I read that sentence. So the Greene family parallel and what it means for Tyrese's outcome. The Greene family's arc is instructive here because it shows us what the resolution of this theme can look like. Herschel, Maggie, and Beth all went through the barn situation. They all held onto their dead, literally in barn stalls, and they all had to let it go. And crucially, they all survived that letting go. The moment when Rick shoots the walkers in the barn and Herschel has to witness it is one of the most traumatic scenes in the show. But Herschel doesn't die from it. He grieves, he integrates, and he becomes arguably the show's most functional moral voice for the next few seasons. What the Greenes demonstrate is that you can let go of your dead and continue. The grief doesn't kill you. The refusal to let go is what kills you eventually, right? Tyreese is the negative proof of the same theorem. He cannot make the move the Greenes made, even having witnessed their example. He has all the information. He has seen what holding on costs, and still, when he is in the vines with that walker, he holds on. This is where the neuroscience point from your notes becomes most relevant. Knowing is not enough. The Greenes knew their neighbors weren't coming back, and they still kept them in the barn. Tyreese knows Karen is dead. He knows the walker isn't Karen. He knows letting go is necessary. The knowledge doesn't reach the place in him where the holding is happening. That place is below language, below reason. It's where unhealed trauma lives. Okay. The death hallucination is the final ledger. In 509, when Tyreese is dying, the hallucination arc doesn't just revisit his guilt. It stages one last time the central question of his arc: can you let go? Every figure in that hallucination is someone he held on to. The governor, he held on to the trauma at Woodbury, let it hollow out his ability to act. Karen, he held on to her, literally and psychologically, long past the point where holding served any purpose. Lizzie and Mika, he held on to the guilt of their deaths, the sense that he should have done something differently, even though he was not, oh, he was there when it happened. That's a mistake by AI. Bob, the downstream consequence of the Martin lie, another ghost he couldn't put down. Martin, the choice he didn't make, held in permanent suspicion. And Beth, whatever happened in the missing 17 days, held in a silence he carries alone. So you see how every single one of those people that are there in his hallucination makes sense, except Beth. So there must have been something extra that happened in the missing 17 days. The hallucination is populated entirely by people he could not let go of. Every one of them is there because he couldn't release them, and now at the moment of his death, they have to release him. That inversion is the show's most precise statement of the theme's logic. He spent his entire arc unable to let go of his dead. At the end, his dead have to let go of him. They have to do for him what he could never do for himself. And it's Beth, his mirror, the strong side of their pairing, the one who could carry the mausoleum without living in it, who functions as the primary releasing voice. What this means for the we get to come back theme. Tyrese's arc is the show's extended argument for why we get to come back. It is not simply an optimistic promise, it's a prerequisite. You only get to come back if you can let go of what needs to be let go of. The return is conditional. And, as we talked about earlier, if you are willing to do what needs to be done to survive. So the Greene family let go of the barn and they came back. Rick let go of the farmer, burned his clothes, and came back as the sheriff. Beth let go of the passive girl who couldn't make herself get drunk and couldn't stop crying and came back as someone who could do what needed to be done. Tyreese never let go. So the version of comeback available to him is only the one that the walkers represent, the hollow, dangerous, involuntary return that is not really a return at all. He becomes, in his dying moments, surrounded by the people he couldn't release, one more person who couldn't complete the arc. The walkers on the fence he refused to kill were, in some sense, always a mirror for what he was becoming. The show just took 2 seasons to close the distance. The bitter irony is that letting go was never going to mean forgetting Karen or the governor's victims or anyone else. The Greens didn't forget their neighbors when Rick shot the walkers in the barn. Letting go, as the show defines it, means accepting that the dead are dead. Without that acceptance, destroying your ability to keep living. Think about where we are at with Daryl's arc in the Daryl Dixon spinoff. Um, Carol has let go of her dead and found optimism, right? And that's why she was able to establish a relationship with Antonio. But we know that Daryl isn't quite there. He's still sad and he's still heavy and he's still carrying it, right? So he has not let go of his dead, which is why they put that poem on there to show what his theme are that he needs to let go of his dead, which doesn't mean, like this is saying, it doesn't mean forgetting Beth or releasing her in a way that like none of us would like. It just means being able to keep living, okay? It's the difference between carrying the mausoleum and moving into it. Dale's watch speech again, not that you may remember time, but that you may forget it for a moment now and then. Tyreese could never forget it for a moment, not even one, and that, in the end, is what the Vine scene is really about. Michonne is telling him, has been telling him since the gas station in language his body couldn't receive, that the moment you release your grip is not the moment you lose them, it's the moment you survive. Okay, that's what I have for the Tyreese stuff, but I also think it's interesting. We have Beth slash Emily singing the song about how he's a struggling man and he has to move on. And I didn't specifically feed that into AI and get anything on it. You can. But see, a lot of us, when this episode aired, we were kind of seeing that as more of a Daryl thing. And I think it could be symbolically for sure. But if you think about it in this context, then it does make sense that this was a song as well in the moment for Tyreese because he's struggling to let go and therefore he has to move on. Like he can't stay in this world as he is anymore. So that's why we hear her singing that. He's a struggling man. He's got to move on. And that's as he's dying that she's saying that. And then, of course, everybody, Bob and her and Lizzie and Mika are saying, you know, it's okay. You can let go. And then he does, you know. So and then we see his funeral. So it's just really interesting, right? I feel like we could go down all kinds of rabbit holes for this and get into the really grainy details, which we won't today. This is kind of the end of what I have. But you see what I mean, how I've been really going down rabbit holes and obsessing about these kinds of things. The next video I'm going to do is the Lizzie Mika one, which of course is going to be super tragic, but I've always thought that Lizzie and Mika, or specifically Lizzie, has a lot of, I mean, both of them do, but has a lot of parallels to Beth. And I, especially in the earlier years, not, you know, in just the few seasons after Coda, I was reluctant to say that because I don't want people thinking that I'm saying that Beth is a psycho or something. But I've always thought there, you know, that Lizzie was just like a foil to her, right? So she was a parallel to her, but kind of an anti-parallel or a foil. And I'm going to illustrate that for you in a big way in the next video where we're going to go really deep into Lizzie and Mika and how they relate to Beth. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this and that it got your the gears in your head moving and that you kind of understand this episode a little better now. But the bottom line to this is that she and Tyreese, Beth and Tyreese, were a pairing, a strong and weak pairing. I mean, with this in mind, you could even go into all of the details of what happened and what's going on. Remember, he saw the twin boys, and that there's so much symbolism. Like it goes so deep. I mean, what is being said on the radio, and there's CRM symbolism in this episode, and just all kinds of things, all kinds of things. But anyway, like I was saying, the bottom line is that they are a strong and weak pairing, and if Tyreese died, it's because Beth lived, and that just makes sense with the fact that everything that was said here, we didn't see her body, she didn't get a send off, she didn't get a funeral. You know, Daryl didn't get any kind of resolution. And there's obviously something that happened that made Tyreese feel guilt about her. And I don't think it's just her getting shot at Grady. I mean, I think there is that, but I think it's a lot more than that. It has to do with the missing 17 days too. So just more evidence that there's something there we didn't see. And, you know, we could go on and on. So definitely evidence to back up what we've said for years, all of our theories, but this just goes way more deep into the psychology. And once again, I hope that you understand that this is the level that Gimple is working on. Okay, this is why it's not always obvious to the GA. And even most of this, I wouldn't have come up with the detail of this without AI's help to connect all the psychological dots. So this is why sometimes the show doesn't make sense to people, and this is why sometimes they have lines that make people go, okay, what does that mean? You know, it's because he's delving deep into their psychology. He knows what it means. He knows what they're going through, and he's just not being very obvious about it. He's only showing us outwardly what they do and what they say, and we have to use those to kind of reverse engineer and figure out the psychology of the arc. Okay, so that's kind of what me and Galadriel Jones are diving into right now. So anyway, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.